Back to Delicious Science with Dr. Joanna McMillan, where we cut through the noise of the nutrition world to bring you the science, honestly, clearly, and with a little bit of joy on the side. Now, today's episode is one that I've been wanting to record for a long time because we're going to go right into the heart of one of those most heated debates in nutrition. It's kind of plants versus animals. Should we be eating mostly plants? Should we be avoiding animal foods? Is red meat actually going to kill us? Or is it a nutrient-dense food that's been unfairly maligned? And can we eat animal foods and still call ourselves environmentally conscious? I've got a lot to say about all of this, not because I have an agenda. I genuinely don't. In fact, I think that might be part of the problem. Too many people in this space do. We have documentaries with a clear activist agenda on one side. We have influencers selling their particular carnivore or other type of program. And somewhere in the middle, there's ordinary people like you and me just trying to work out what on earth to make for dinner. I'm a nutrition scientist. I've spent more than 20 years, actually almost 30, reading the research, translating it into real life and trying to understand both the big picture and the nuance. And what the science says is much more interesting and more reassuring than either side of this food war wants you to believe. By the end of this episode, I want you to feel confident, clear, and frankly, a bit relieved. Because the answer to this debate is not one side wins. The answer is much more delicious and genuinely backed by the science of evolution, biology, geography, nutrition, and sustainability. So, let's get into it. How did we end up at war over dinner? I want to start with a question. When did choosing what to eat for dinner become a political act? It wasn't always like this. I grew up in rural Scotland and food was, well, it was just food. My mum cooked from scratch pretty much every night. We had a veggie patch. We lived next door to a dairy farm which provided us with fresh milk every day. We ate oily fish and other seafood from the local coast. Game meat in season. I have to say venison is delicious and abundant in Scotland. Loads of root vegetables, oats and barley of course, and the most extraordinary berries you have ever tasted. That is the one fruit that I tell you what, I don't know what it is, but berries from Scotland are fabulous. Nobody was vegan back then. Nobody was carnivore. Nobody was keto. We just ate what the land and the seasons provided. A little bit of a romantic view. There was some naughty stuff in there, but honestly, fast food just hadn't hit the decks yet in Scotland, so it wasn't a big part of my upbringing. And as I look back on it, it really was a genuinely healthy diet. Not perfect, but a genuinely healthy diet. What diet is perfect, by the way? That is how humans have eaten for almost all of our history. Local, seasonal, varied, sometimes more plant-heavy, sometimes more animal-heavy. Depends on the geography, the climate, and the time of year. But overwhelmingly and almost universally, diets were omnivorous. So how did we end up here? Tribal, anxious, guilt-ridden about whether our chicken dinner is destroying the planet, and reading ingredient labels at the supermarket like they contain the secret to immortality. A few things happened. The rise of nutrition science in the 20th century gave us the ability to pull food apart into its component nutrients, and we kind of became obsessed with the parts rather than the whole. And then came along epidemiological studies, which are enormously valuable, but also famously easy to misinterpret. And then social media. It turned diet philosophy into identity. And most recently, the urgency of climate change has pushed food choices into the environmental spotlight in ways that are important, but are often oversimplified. So the result is two very loud camps. On one side, the plant-based movement, arguing that animal foods are unnecessary, harmful and environmentally catastrophic. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got the carnivore movement, arguing that plants are largely irrelevant or even harmful, and that we should be eating almost exclusively meat and other animal foods. Both have passionate advocates, both make some points worth listening to, but both also cherry-pick the evidence. And both, frankly, are wrong in the most important ways. Now, I'm not for a moment dismissing the genuine motivations behind either camp. The environmental concerns driving plant-based eating are real and urgent. The intuition that ancestral animal-rich diets supported human health is not without foundation. But when a position goes from here's a perspective worth considering to this is the only right way and everyone else is dangerously misguided, then that's when we have a problem. This is when people become confused, anxious, and sometimes nutritionally worse off. So let's just take a step back, look at the full picture, and find some sanity. What our bodies tell us, the evolutionary and biological case. So let me start where I think it makes sense, the biological evidence. Not a study from last year, not a documentary, evolution. Humans are omnivores. That's not a controversial statement in biology, it's simply what the evidence shows. Our digestive system is neither that of an obligate carnivore like a cat, which must eat animal foods to survive, nor that of a herbivore like a cow, with a multi-chambered stomach designed to ferment grass and plant material over many hours. We sit comfortably in between. We have the teeth for it, incisors for biting, molars for grinding, canines that can help to tear food. We have a gut length that can handle both protein-rich animal foods and fibre-rich plant foods. We have metabolic pathways that allow us to extract nutrients from both. And critically, we evolved eating both. The best estimates of ancestral human diets suggest enormous variation by geography, climate, and season. Populations living near the coast ate a lot of seafood. Those in Arctic regions relied heavily on animals. Those in tropical zones had access to far more plant foods. And some groups ate more tubers, some more berries, some more meat, some more fish. There was no single one ancestral diet. But what there was, almost universally, was omnivory. And here's the thing that often gets lost in evolutionary nutrition debates. True ancestral diets were not the steak and bacon affairs that some carnivore advocates imagine. Wild animal foods were typically leaner, more varied, and often richer in omega-3 fats than many modern intensively farmed meats. And they were eaten alongside a huge diversity of wild plant foods, roots, tubers, leaves, fruits, seeds, nuts, herbs, and fibres that most of us today would not recognise as food. That's not carnivore. That is what I would call a plant-rich omnivore. Now, some people argue that the design of our gut gives us the definitive answer. I've heard it said that our gut is closer to herbivores than carnivores, and therefore we're designed for plants. I've also heard the opposite claim, that because our stomach acid is strong, we must be designed for meat. And the truth is that our gut design is beautifully adapted to extract maximum nutrition from a mixed diet. And the extraordinary diversity of our gut microbiome is far richer and more metabolically flexible than that of obligate carnivores. It's designed to ferment the complex carbohydrates in plant foods while we also digest animal protein and fat efficiently. So we have evolved for both. The gut is not a one-side-wins argument. It's one of the strongest cases for balance. The case for plants, why we all need more of them. Right, let's talk about plants, because here I want to be very clear. The evidence for eating more whole plant foods is overwhelming. If you are not eating enough vegetables, legumes, fruits, whole grains, nuts and seeds, you're missing out on some of the most important nutrition science has ever identified. Let me tell you why. The first and biggest reason, you've heard me talk about this many times to my regulars, is fibre. Now, I have an entire book on this, of course, The Fibre Factor, so I could talk on this all day, but the short version is this. Fibre is the main fuel for your gut microbiome. And your gut microbiome is not some trendy wellness concept. It's a living ecosystem of trillions of microorganisms that talk constantly to your immune system, your metabolism, your gut lining, your inflammatory pathways, and yes, even your brain. The science linking the gut microbiome with mood, cognition, and healthy aging is still developing, but the direction is fascinating. When you eat a diverse range of plants, and diversity really is the key word here, you nourish a more diverse microbiome. And that microbiome ferments fibres and resistant starches into short-chain fatty acids. Those protect the lining of the gut, they calm inflammatory signalling, and they support metabolic health. The average Australian still falls well short of fibre targets, and we're not alone. What I call the fibre famine is happening all over the world, and it's largely a result of not eating enough whole plant foods. Then there are phytonutrients, the thousands of biologically active compounds that plants make. polyphenols such as flavonoids, carotenoids, glucosinolates, and many, many, many more. These compounds do far more than act as antioxidants. They interact with your gut microbes, they influence inflammatory pathways, support cellular defense systems, and may affect how genes are switched on and off. You get them from colourful vegetables, berries, herbs, spices, extra virgin olive oil, tea, coffee, cocoa, legumes, nuts and seeds. This is what plants do uniquely well. The research on populations that eat more vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and overall plant diversity consistently show lower risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, bowel cancer, and several other chronic diseases. This is robust, well-replicated evidence. So I want to be absolutely clear, whether you are an omnivore, a vegetarian, a vegan, or anywhere on that spectrum in between, we all need to eat more whole plant foods. The question is not whether plants are important. Of course they are. The question is whether they are the only thing that matters. And that is where the evidence tells a very different story. The case for animals, the nutrients the debate keeps ignoring. Now let's talk about what animal foods provide. And this is the part of the conversation that often gets left out, or at least minimised, in that plant-based narrative. The most obvious contribution is protein. Animal proteins are complete proteins, and that simply means that they provide all of the essential amino acids in proportions the body can use efficiently. They're also generally highly digestible. Now that doesn't mean you can't get enough protein from plants. Of course you can, with some planning. But gram for gram, animal protein usually gives you a more concentrated and efficient amino acid package. This matters more as we age because our muscles become less responsive to protein. We need a stronger signal to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and high-quality protein becomes increasingly important for preserving strength, mobility, and independence. But animal foods are not just protein delivery systems. Red meat provides heme iron, the form of iron our bodies absorb more readily. And I love this detail. Meat, fish, and poultry can also help you to absorb the non-heme iron from plant foods in the same meal. So the iron in your lentils is better used when you eat them alongside a little lean beef, lamb, chicken, or fish. That's just a beautiful example of how plant and animal foods can work together rather than sitting on opposite sides of a battlefield. Vitamin B12 is another big one. The only naturally reliable dietary sources of B12 are animal foods: meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. If you eat a fully plant-based diet, you absolutely need B12 from either supplements or fortified foods. That's not a criticism of vegan diets, it's just biochemistry. B12 is essential for nerves, for DNA synthesis, for red blood cell production, and a deficiency can creep up slowly, but it has very serious consequences. Zinc is another nutrient where animal foods have an advantage. You can get zinc from plant foods, but phytates and grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds reduce the absorption. Now again, this is not an argument against plants. I love these foods. It's an argument for understanding the different strengths of different food groups. And it shows us why the combination of foods on your plate and in your overall diet is where you absolutely have to look for the big picture, not just looking at each individual food in isolation. Now, I want to give seafood a little moment on its own here because seafood sits in a special category. A major 2025 review led by Australian researchers looked across more than a decade of seafood and health research and concluded that the evidence supports eating at least 2 serves of seafood a week. A serve is about 100 to 150 grams as part of a healthy dietary pattern. Now, most people think of seafood purely in terms of omega-3 fats, specifically those long-chain omega-3s EPA and DHA, and those are incredibly important. They support heart health, they're critical for the developing brain during pregnancy, but they also play a role in brain health as we age. But seafood is more than omega-3s. It provides high-quality protein again. It provides iodine, selenium, zinc, B12, and depending on the species, iron and vitamin D, among other nutrients. Iodine deserves a special mention because it's genuinely tricky to get from many diets, and it's often low. It's essential for thyroid function, it's essential for a baby's brain development during pregnancy, and it seems to remain important for our brain function throughout life. So the practical message is beautifully simple. 2 serves of seafood a week with at least 1 oily fish. For oily fish, think salmon, sardines, trout, mackerel or herring. And yes, tuna can count too, although the type matters. Albacore tends to be higher in omega-3s than other canned tuna varieties. Now I want to talk about something I'm genuinely excited about because the science is only just beginning to catch up with it. A group of compounds that we call zoonutrients, literally nutrients from animals. These are biologically active compounds found exclusively or predominantly in animal foods. They're usually not classified as essential vitamins or minerals, at least not yet, but they do important work in the body. Creatine is one of them. It's concentrated in animal muscle, which means meat, poultry and fish are the key food sources. Eggs and dairy contain tiny amounts, and plant foods, virtually none. Published figures vary, but herring often comes out near the top, and herring is also a fabulous source of long-chain omega-3s, so herring for the win. Red meat, pork and oily fish such as salmon are also good sources, and there's somewhat lower amounts in chicken and whitefish. Now, it's important to say that the amounts that you get in food are smaller than what you'll get if you're taking a creatine supplement. A standard supplement dose is usually around 3 to 5 grams a day, whereas a 300-gram raw weight steak might give you 1 to 1.5 grams of creatine before cooking, and you'll tend to lose a little bit in the cooking process. But that doesn't make food creatine irrelevant. Nutrition is rarely about one heroic dose from one meal. It's about what we eat repeatedly over weeks, months, and years. If you regularly eat fish, meat, or poultry, you're getting a steady dietary supply of creatine, alongside loads of other nutrients, including protein, iron, zinc, B12, selenium, taurine, and in the case of oily fish, omega-3 fats. Those small daily contributions can add up, particularly for people with higher needs, lower muscle mass, aging muscles, or diets that otherwise provide very little creatine. And creatine is not just about gym performance. It helps cells rapidly recycle ATP, that's the body's energy currency. And that's why researchers are interested in creatine for muscle health, for healthy aging, for brain function, and situations where the brain is under metabolic stress. There's even new emerging evidence looking at the role of creatine in helping the brain to work better when it's sleep deprived. Pretty extraordinary. The cognitive evidence is still emerging, and I won't oversell it, but some studies suggest creatine supplementation may modestly support aspects of memory, attention, and processing speed. Now, people eating vegetarian or vegan diets get almost no creatine from food. And that's what makes creatine a fascinating example of a zoonutrient. Not essential in the classical vitamin sense because the body can make some, but potentially useful when supplemented regularly through diet. Choline is another one. Eggs are one of the richest everyday sources, and you'll also find choline in meat, fish and dairy, with smaller amounts in foods like soybeans and some vegetables. So this is not one that's exclusively in animals, but there's no doubt the levels are much higher in those animal sources. Choline is used to make acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter involved in memory, learning and muscle control. It's also critical during pregnancy for the development of the baby's brain and nervous system. Now, many people don't meet the recommended intakes, and it is a nutrient that we probably don't talk about enough. Then there's taurine, which is abundant in seafood and meat, and it's virtually absent in plants. Taurine is involved in bile acid metabolism, cell volume regulation, antioxidant defenses, and the functioning of the heart, muscles, and nervous system. A 2023 paper in Science caused a lot of excitement because taurine levels declined with age in several species, and restoring taurine improved health span markers in animals. Now, that doesn't mean that we should all rush out and take taurine as an anti-aging supplement. The human evidence is not there yet, but it does remind us that animal foods contain bioactive compounds that we're only just beginning to understand. Carnosine, found in skeletal muscle meat, is another example. It helps buffer acidity in muscle during intense exercise, and it has anti-glycation properties, at least in lab studies. Whether that translates into major long-term disease effects in humans is still being worked out, but again, it is part of this bigger picture. Animal foods bring more to the table than protein, iron, and B12. They bring a whole suite of compounds that may matter, especially over a lifetime. I want to be careful here not to overstate what is known, as much of this research is emerging, but the direction of the evidence is clear enough to say this. Animal foods provide a unique nutritional package that plants just don't fully replicate. Now, that does not mean that everybody needs to eat large amounts of animal food. It does not mean that plant-based diets can't be healthy with careful planning and some supplementation. But it does mean the idea that animal foods are nutritionally unnecessary for everyone is way too simplistic. Sustainability. It's not as simple as eat plants, save the planet. Now, we need to talk about sustainability because this is where so many people's food choices are being shaped right now, and I think the narrative has become dangerously oversimplified. The argument often goes something like this. Animal agriculture contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, land use and water use. Therefore, plants are always better than animals. Therefore, the most ethical diet is one with no animal foods at all. There is real science between the first part of that argument. Globally, livestock production is a significant contributor to environmental pressures. That's true. We can't hand-wave that away. But the leap from some animal agriculture has a large footprint to all animal foods are environmentally catastrophic and should be eliminated is not science. That's ideology. Let me complicate the picture because food systems are complicated. Not all land can grow lentils, wheat, vegetables or orchards. Enormous areas, for example, of Australia, New Zealand, parts of Africa, South America and the British Isles are too dry, rocky, steep or fragile for arable cropping. But grasses grow there. And grazing animals can convert grasses and other plants that humans can't eat into nutrient-dense food that we can. That doesn't make all grazing automatically sustainable, but it does mean that animals can have a role in food systems that cropping alone cannot fill. Then there's regenerative agriculture. This is a space I'm very interested in, and the science is growing. Well-managed grazing systems, especially when combined with ground cover, biodiversity, careful stocking rates, and soil restoration, can actually improve soil health and increase soil carbon in some context. But, and this is important, it's not a magic wand. Soil carbon gains vary by region, rainfall, starting soil condition and management, and so that doesn't give us permission to eat unlimited beef. The point is that cattle are not always bad and cattle are not always good. The point is, it's how the food is produced that matters. In other words, it's farming systems that matter, and that applies whether they're animals or plant foods. Biodiversity matters too. Some of the most ecologically depleted food landscapes on Earth are vast monocultures, single crops, repeated over huge areas. They're heavily dependent on fertilizers, pesticides and herbicides. Now we do need nuance here as well because much of that grain and soy currently feeds animals, not people. So this is not a simple plants versus animals story. It's a question of what we grow, how we grow it, what we feed to animals, how much ultra-processed food we make from it, and how much we waste. A recent CSIRO analysis of Australian diets found something pretty fascinating. The diets that were both higher in diet quality and lower in environmental impact were not vegan diets. They included plenty of plant foods, but also animal foods. In fact, about 60 to 80% of their protein was coming from animal sources in those diets that were most nutritionally adequate. The point is not that everyone needs that exact ratio. The point is that sustainable healthy diets can include animal foods, and that cutting ultra-processed discretionary foods may be just as important as arguing about meat. That is the real story. Ultra-processed food is the elephant in the room of the sustainability debate. These products require enormous amounts of energy, water, packaging, and transport to manufacture. They displace whole foods, they contribute to food waste, and they're almost entirely absent from the sustainability conversation because the conversation has become so focused on whether to eat meat. Reducing food waste and reducing ultra-processed food consumption are two of the highest impact changes available to us as individuals and to food systems on the whole. Neither requires giving up red meat. So the sustainability conversation we need is not plants good, animal bad. It is eat more whole foods, waste less food, choose better produced foods when you can, eat a wide variety of plants, include animal foods thoughtfully, and stop pretending that sustainability can be solved by one simple slogan. The pro solution: meet the plant-rich omnivore. So if the answer is neither fully plant-based nor carnivore, what is it? It's what I have called the pro diet, and pro stands for plant-rich omnivore. I want to be clear about what this is. It's not a diet in the traditional sense. There's no rule book, there's no forbidden foods, and thank goodness there's no guilt. It is just a framework, and it rests on an idea that the evidence has supported for a very long time. Plants should form the foundation and the majority of what we eat, and quality animal foods can play a supporting role that enhances the overall nutritional picture in ways that plants alone just can't replicate. So what does a plant-rich omnivore plate look like? Half the plate is veggies, a variety of colours ideally. A quarter is your protein: fish, eggs, dairy, poultry, lean meat, tofu, tempeh or legumes all count depending on the meal and the day. And a quarter is then your whole grain or your starchy vegetable base, or you can opt to use your legumes here. They count as both your protein source as well as your low GI, fibre-rich carb source. So it's not complicated. For red meat, the guidance is not a slab of steak at every meal. It might be lean red meat a few times a week, seafood twice a week, eggs, poultry or dairy according to your preferences and needs. The Australian guideline for lean red meat is up to about 450 grams of cooked weight per week. That's not excessive. It's a palm-sized serve several times a week alongside a colourful, vegetable-rich plate. Now, this way of eating is not radical. It's close to the Mediterranean diet. It overlaps with traditional Japanese-style eating. It's the way people largely ate in rural Scotland in my childhood. It's close to the way many traditional food cultures have eaten for generations. Plants as the foundation, animal foods as those valued nutrient-dense additions. So it's not a new idea. It's old wisdom supported by modern science. And here is what I love most about it. It's not a sacrifice. It's not a compromise. It's genuinely one of the most delicious, varied, joyful ways to eat. Eating more plants is not a punishment. Legumes are extraordinary. Vegetables are endlessly interesting. Herbs, spices, extra virgin olive oil, nuts, seeds and grains and berries. These are not side notes. They're the colour and the flavour of the plate. And for those of you happy to eat animal foods, then enjoying good quality meat, fish, eggs and dairy, cooked with care, shared at a table with people you love, is one of the great pleasures of being human. I believe nutrition should make life better. More energy, better health, more pleasure, not more anxiety, more rules and more guilt. The plant-rich omnivore approach does just that. So in conclusion, I want to leave you with a few things to think about and a few things to do. First, if you're eating mostly ultra-processed food, that is your priority. Before you worry about whether your protein is plant or animal, look at the degree of processing. Cutting back on ultra-processed discretionary foods is one of the most powerful changes that you can make for your health and potentially also for sustainability. And bear in mind that recent analysis is showing that some of us are eating up to 70% of our foods from ultra-processed foods. So this is something that we can really make a major change with. Second, eat more plants, more vegetables, more legumes, more variety. Not necessarily instead of animal foods, but alongside them. Think diversity, not replacement. Third, if you do eat animal foods, keep doing it thoughtfully. Choose quality where you can. Think seafood twice a week, Lean red meat a few times a week if you enjoy it, and eggs, poultry and dairy according to your needs and preferences. These foods are doing nutritional work that plants just don't fully replicate. And finally, let go of the food guilt. The diet wars have made so many people anxious about what to eat, and that anxiety is itself a health burden. Eating should be one of life's great pleasures. It connects us to the land, to our culture, to our memories, and to the people we love. No dietary tribe owns the moral high ground here. The evidence, when you read it carefully and in full, points clearly and quietly to balance, variety, and joy. That is the plant-rich omnivore. That is what I believe in, what I practice, and what I'll keep advocating for. And of course, if you do choose to cut out animal foods for whatever reason, then you absolutely can, but do think carefully about the balance of plant foods in your diet and what supplements are best going to support you. Thank you so much for listening to Delicious Science. If today's episode sparked something for you, I'd love you to share it. Please send it to a friend, perhaps one who's deep in one of those dietary tribes, or someone who's just confused about what to eat. That is exactly who I made this podcast for. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a review if you can. It genuinely helps others to find the show and helps me to keep building the podcast. And come and find me on all the usual channels at Dr. Joanna McMillan. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one, but also for any topics that you'd like me to cover in future episodes. Until next time, eat well, eat joyfully, and stay curious about nutrition science.